When the Alaska Peace Summit happened, before the event began, of course Russian media went there beforehand to scope out the place. I heard a story that one of the reporters saw an American and Alaskan man riding a bike that was of Soviet make and model, a motorbike. So he goes up, starts a conversation, asks him, hey, do you know that's a Russian bike? He says, yeah, and they start talking about bikes, talking about that bike and how it is to maintain it. Says that one thing, it is difficult to get replacement parts for it because of the import bans from Russia. So the news reporter goes back, makes a story about that conversation. From what I heard, that story became viral in Russia, and as a response to that, when Putin actually came to Alaska for the summit, he brought with him an entirely new bike of that same make and model, basically a whole set of replacement parts for that man. And then that man got interviewed by Russian news again. He said that he doesn't want to give Putin any kind of PR victory for this, he's not going to say anything. I think the exact words were, you will get nothing from me. And that, I think, is a good example of where Russian-American relations are right now, as far as regular people are concerned. Now that the hook's out of the way, I'll tell you how this video came to be. I was browsing YouTube Analytics, I saw the Inspirations tab. That is, they have a tab where they have an AI suggest video ideas to you. A lot of them weren't stuff I'd be interested in, but the very first one was, can spirituality bridge East-West political divides? Now, as far as that one goes, the AI knew me. I talk about politics, I talk about history, I talk about Russian literature, Gulag Archipelago, and I talk about religion, spirituality. They knew I would see that and I wouldn't be able to resist the topic. So let's go through a little and just talk off the cuff about the suggested hooks and outline and description for this. Subtitle, A Timely Exploration is Presented Regarding the Potential for Spiritual Philosophies to Transcend Geopolitical Friction Between Eastern and Western Nations. The ways in which shared spiritual tenets could foster understanding and common ground amidst contemporary global challenges are considered. Going through the outline, examining the immediate geopolitical landscape, Ukraine, Taiwan, trade wars, posing the question, is there anything strong enough to bridge this divide? Goes into exploring universal tenets across major Eastern and Western spiritual traditions, citing examples of historical figures or movements that transcended political lines, discussing how these common values are often overlooked in political discourse. So this AI is basically telling me to present spirituality as an alternative to diplomacy. So I guess I'll just talk about where I'm at. Around 2 or 3 years ago, I started reading Gulag Archipelago. Finished that book in a little under a year. That was certainly an education for me, but more than that, I found it inspiring. It gave me a drive to read and understand more Russian history, Russian culture. I explored Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. I tried to get into Pushkin. I couldn't really get that far. I peeked into Trotsky's writings as much as I could tolerate. At some point, I'll check out Gorky. Ayn Rand, I do want to do a deep dive into Ayn Rand. But basically, I got to know Russian history, at least an outline of it, and Russian culture, at least what it was a century and a half ago, by reading Russian authors. And Russian authors, the two big ones, Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, there is a lot of spirituality, Christianity particularly, baked into their writings. So just as a consequence of reading them, you're forced to think about Christian ideas. Tolstoy, I think, is probably the most talented fiction writer of the 20th century. I mean that seriously, and it becomes even more clear when you go through some of his short stories. Right now, I'm going through a book of Tolstoy short stories written in chronological order, and I can sort of see, in time, going along with him, how he honed his writing process along the way. And even very early on, he was extremely talented. As soon as he stepped out of that typecast mold of writing for the purpose to educate, to paint a clear picture of what war life is like. As soon as he sort of stepped beyond that, he absolutely bloomed. He wrote Sevastopol, then he wrote Meeting a Moscow Acquaintance. He experimented with describing environments and the natural world when he wrote The Snowstorm. And then he really got going. Russian Proprietor, Lucerne. I did a whole book review on Lucerne. I'm just really impressed by the detail in character development, how he shows, not tells, how he thinks about the character's mindset and how that influences their perception of the world around them. Most of all, like I said over and over again, how he's able to write a Christian short story while barely even mentioning God in it. And then Dostoevsky, he's a giant in his own right. His life story is wild. Brothers Karamazov is very impressive. I actually heard somewhere that Brothers Karamazov is Vladimir Putin's favorite book. Who knew? Actually makes sense when you think about it. But The Gambler is also pretty good. Crime and Punishment is amazing. So these writers that I absolutely fell in love with, they sucked me into Russian thinking. And then now I'm going back and going through Gulag Archipelago again, this time with a fine-tooth comb. Paying close enough attention, making enough notes on it that I can actually make a pretty comprehensive summary and analysis for it. That's just my own experience interacting with Russian ideas. Now, as far as religion goes, there are similarities and differences, of course. I know of the Tolstoyan movement. I do not think they were super widespread. I think the mainstream there is Russian Orthodox, which, if I would burn up walking into a Catholic church, even more so for Orthodox. At the very least, the Orthodox do not forbid their priesthood to marry. That is a good thing. But then at the same time, they are much more over the top when it comes to worshipping icons. And praying to saints, too, for that matter. Something Orthodox and Catholics have in common that a lot of Protestants stray away from is the Apocrypha. They do read the apocryphal books as scripture. That includes the book of Baruch. Here is Baruch chapter 6, verses 3 through 5. Quote, "In Babylon you will see people carrying upon their shoulders gods of silver and gold and wood, which inspire fear in the pagans. Be careful not to imitate these pagans, or to allow fear of these gods to overwhelm you. When you see the heathen crowds before and behind them, worshipping them, rather say in your hearts, only you, Lord, are worthy of worship." End quote. And that's really the attitude I take when it comes to icons, images, and yes, that does include the magic bread, only you, God in heaven, are worthy of worship. I do not believe in transubstantiation. I am a little weird, though. America has a lot of Catholics, but I think America is majority Protestant. Protestants also don't believe in transubstantiation, but they don't take the idol thing that far. I am Anabaptist, so I pay attention to oaths and things that should be considered oaths, and I try to avoid those things. Most American Protestants don't care at all. And Catholics too, for that matter. I don't know about Russian Orthodox. Also, nonviolence. Being Anabaptist, I have, at the very least, a healthy respect and understanding for the idea of Christian pacifism. I'm sorta halfway there with buying into it. I recognize absolutely all life is sacred. Ending any life at all for any reason is a tragedy. But at the same time, if it is a life or death situation, if I do legitimately have to act in self-defense, I'm ready for it. I don't want it to happen, but I'm ready for it at least. I do, however, consider myself a conscientious objector for military purposes. I will refuse a draft if it ever comes to that. Tolstoyans were the same way, but Russian Orthodox, I don't think so. American, both Protestants and Catholics, would say that I'm a little kooky for that. But William Penn, founder of Pennsylvania, Quaker, another pacifist. Quote from William Penn, "What's right is right even if everyone is against it. What's wrong is wrong even if everyone is for it. I go by what's right and I stick to my decisions." But hey, at the very least, here's something that all these different flavors of Christian can probably agree on. One of the footnotes in this suggested outline that the AI gave me for this video, considering how shared practices like mindfulness or meditation could foster empathy across divides. Yeah, I think all these different flavors of Christian can agree that prayer is what we should lean on. But getting away from just musing about religious differences, religious nuance, thinking about the people themselves. For all the books I've read, for all the Russian history I know, I actually know very little about modern-day Russian culture. I've seen them around briefly online. I've played games where there was like a Russian alliance, an American alliance, and we had like a rivalry war with each other, and that was fun. Russians are fun to play online games with, but I haven't like had a deep conversation with a Russian, and I really want to. I would love to find a Russian who studied both Tolstoy and C.S. Lewis and just dig in and have a deep conversation about that. I want to meet new Russian people and just interact as friends. But I think a huge challenge to that, apart from just how Americans view the whole Ukraine thing, a big challenge to that is language. I know there are a decent, not a majority, but a decent number of Russians who speak English. Far fewer Americans speak Russian. And an added challenge to anyone who wants to learn either language is they have two different alphabets. So, me personally, I know enough German to get around, I know enough Spanish to get around, but the whole new alphabet thing is a real challenge for me, even when I just peeked in to try and learn a few fundamentals of the Russian language. Russian is in the Slavic language tree, that is a Proto-Indo-European language cousin to English, to Latin, but still, because of that writing system, it is harder. From what I can tell, though, from the little I do know, I think that the story I told at the beginning for the hook is probably a good microcosm, a good example to explain how Russians and Americans view each other in general, just the regular people on the ground. Russians, I get the impression, are at least friendly, or at least try to be friendly, enthusiastic when someone shows an interest in their culture, but then Americans are just absorbed in politics. We always have been. And the political mood of the day, in general, for a foreigner outside looking in trying to understand, you can think of it as two two political groups in America. There are people who love Trump and people who hate him. The people who hate Trump also hate that Russia invaded Ukraine. They see it in a very simple way. They ignore any kind of cultural context. All they see is big nation invading little nation, big nation bad. And they don't know anything about the breakaway regions, about the resources, about the politics. But that does not stop them from being self-assured in their opinion. They applaud Poland getting involved. They applaud America sending hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine. I think they do the same thing to Putin that they do to Trump, which is they slander him as both this evil mastermind and as a bumbling fool. And both of these things cannot be true at once. But their media narrative sorta contradicts itself in that. And meanwhile, on the other hand, the other group, the people who love Trump, America First is the core slogan that drives that group. How do they view the Israel-Gaza thing? Well, don't like either of them. Why are we there? And in the same way, how do they view the Russia-Ukraine thing? Well, there's no reason for us to be there. So given that the mainstream political narrative in America is either indifferent or outright hateful towards the Russian nation, it's not surprising that a Russian news reporter can just talk to a random American on the street and get the response, nope, I don't want to give Putin any kind of media victory, he's not getting anything from me. Which I think is kind of sad. Now, me, for one, someone I really look up to, he's an American, he was born in Chicago, black guy, jazz musician, born in the 1950s. Now, if you know about American history, you'll know that he grew up at a time where there were a lot of racial tensions. America was working on getting rid of something called the Jim Crow laws in the 1960s. Those were laws that said black people in America had to have separate bathrooms, separate drinking fountains. They had to sit in a different spot when they took a bus or a subway. They even had completely different school buildings for them. The 1960s is the decade when America was getting rid of that. And then we had Daryl Davis, this character, this jolly fat black man, asked himself the question, how can somebody hate me when they don't even know me? Because there were a lot of people who just didn't want to talk to a person if they had a certain color of skin. So what Daryl Davis did, he went out, he found people in the Ku Klux Klan. For Russians, that is a group of people, white American Protestants, famous for hating blacks. They started in the 1860s and 70s after the Civil War. The most popular time for them, I think, was the 1920s and 30s. What they were famous for doing is they would go out, find blacks who maybe they were accused of a crime, something to that effect. And it was mob justice. They would do what they call lynching, which is often they would hang the black from a tree or they would kill him in some other way. But then in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, this group started getting much less popular. People just didn't care as much about it. So Daryl Davis, born in 1958, what he did is he went out and found people in this group and just talked to them, just had a conversation, just talked like two normal guys. Yes, they talked about racial issues. Yes, they told him that they hate black people, but he would just not necessarily be combative, just talk like a normal person. And something as simple as just talking and striking up a friendship was enough that dozens, maybe even hundreds of these Ku Klux Klan members were willing to leave that group and make a gift to Daryl Davis of their robes that were a symbol of membership in that group. And that is the person I look up to, someone who's willing to go out and talk to the other side like a normal person, just strike up a friendship human to human. And that's one of the reasons I would love to find Russians online to talk to, even though I don't know how many Russians know, but we just saw in America this week someone called Charlie Kirk was shot and killed at a public event. Charlie Kirk was famous for going to university campuses. These places were primarily left-wing. There are a lot of people who absolutely hate Trump, a lot. It was not physically safe for him to be there, as we just saw. But he went there anyway, having the opposite political view, and just talked to people, just answered their questions. He did that for years, and while doing that, he was killed. So talking to people you disagree with is not always safe, it's not always comfortable, but I think it's what God wants us to do. I said before I'm Anabaptist. One of the things Anabaptists care about a lot is, blessed be the peacemakers, they will be called children of God. They care about building peace, building bridges. And trying to emulate Daryl Davis in that way is one of the ways I choose to do that. But at least for now, that's what I got. Can spirituality bridge the East-West political divide? I mean, I hope so. It's worth a shot. So I'll put this out there. Anyone who wants to talk to me, especially any Russian, but really anyone from anywhere in the world, if you just want to chat and talk about whatever, my email address is on my YouTube channel, so yeah, reach out. I would really love if someone did that.